All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. As we're waiting for everybody to jump in, I'm just gonna yap a little bit, but you guys feel free to jump into our chat, introduce yourselves, let us know where you're tuning in from. I'm in Newcastle, New South Wales. Dan, where are you at?
Brisbane, Australia.
Fuck yeah, Brisbane, Australia. I love it. Welcome to our fourth Future Proof webinar. This is brought to you by Edge of Search and Firewire Digital. My name is Shonavi. I'm the head of community and field marketing at Firewire and the co-founder of Edge of Search, which is a unique search marketing conference that we host here in Newcastle, New South Wales. And our guest speaker today is Dan Petrovic. He's the managing director of DEJAN Marketing, which is an Australian-based agency focused on AI SEO, which is a very exciting time. Yay, it's Nick. Hi, Nick. You got a compliment on your beard.
Thank you.
Dan is an international speaker. His work has been internationally recognized, and he and his team work with major global brands on strategic product, service, and brand visibility in AI search, which is what we are focusing on today. So I'm very, very excited about this. Dan also holds 2 Google Awards for his work in uncovering a hole exposing Google's core search and ranking systems. Everyone remembers the Google API leak. What a time to be alive, right? So I will let Dan introduce himself in a little bit more detail in a second, but first, just a couple of FYIs. I think we've got the majority of people that are going to be here today, so please feel free to use the chat. It's there for you to talk to us, make comments, share feelings and thoughts, whatever comes up. We want to hear about it. We've also got a Q&A section there, so any questions you have for Dan throughout the presentation, please feel free to pop them there. I will be monitoring, so I will be able to share them as we go along. And if there's more at the end, then we can go through those after the presentation as well if there's time. Also, if you need to jump out for any reason, don't worry, you'll be sent a recording of today's webinar, and it will be available on the Edge of Search YouTube to watch later as well. You can also find our previous webinars on there and also the latest episodes of the Edge of Search podcast. And I will add in all of today's relevant links for you all in the chat as well. But I will hand it over to you, Dan.
Thank you. So today we are raw and unscripted. We do have 200 and something slides that we could go through if we want to. We've already kind of had an agreement that if there's a burning question, jump in, interrupt. We can have a back and forth exchange. It doesn't have to be too formal. But what I want to open up with, I suppose, is that I guess today I have a lot of good news. After years of poking around and testing things, we've finally seen evidence of real work doing real things in the wild. Things that we do, all the theories, all the testing has shown some promise. So that's pretty exciting. We do have a lot of experimental work to do still because this is a new industry and we always keep things honest. When we talk to people that we work with, the teams that we collaborate with, we say, we haven't done this before. This is new. The tools, you'll be the first ones to use the tool. So approach it with a sense of adventure and as a good SEO, test, experiment, report on results, admit failures, and celebrate the wins. But yeah, lots of good news today in the things that we've done. So this is us studying, poking the model with a stick. What does it do? Why does it do the things that it does? The good news is that not even the platforms that made the models understand why the models do the things that they do. So we're kind of all in the same boat. But one thing that's not quite clear, I think, in the SEO industry is that everyone is talking about models saying Gemini or GPT and Claude. And they think model is it. I think it's important to create this distinction between the model and the harness, the agentic harness that the model operates within, right? Because I'm hearing things like when an LLM crawls your website, whoa, stop right there. LLM is a static file sitting on a server somewhere and doesn't do anything. Tokens come in, output comes out, that's it. Model, an LLM doesn't do anything. Text input makes output. All the other wonderful things that you're seeing, like crawling and fan-out queries and little grounding snippets, all that is part of the pre-processing pipeline, all the surrounding software and a variety of different tools and frameworks that support the operation of a model. So I just want to highlight this one thing that I see everyone get, not everyone, a lot of people get wrong. Just referring to the model as it's the whole thing. So there's the model, there's an agentic harness with its own sub-agents and search tools and fan-out queries and everything else that happens. And then the user interfaces with that model in the background. What does this mean? Well, that means that search has an AI on top. So that's something that's new, right? Search engine optimization got a layer of generative model being the mediator between the human and the index, right? So we're talking to the information now. So if you flip that around, so this is AI search. But if you go, okay, well, what about AI assistants, or formerly known as chatbots? We don't like to use that word; sounds archaic. So chatbot is like the inverted version of that. Chatbot is the model with search plugged in, and this is the search with the model plugged in. So what happens? You type in your prompt, and something like this happens, kicking off 6 searches. So 6 fanouts are happening in the background. We've got 25 grounding sources on the side, and those grounding sources are somehow integrated into the model's context, and then the model decides what to do with that information. And you can see how it's like, okay, it's recommending brands one by one, right? So prompt comes in, gets decomposed into grounding fan-out queries. Each fan-out query triggers a search. This is just normal search that happens in a system in the background. So for every search, the processing pipeline brings a set of results, and then they get filtered down to the final grounding corpus. That grounding corpus is then selected, and the selected stuff gets into the model's context. And that generates the grounding context plus the prompt, and then the model gives you the text output. Then the little bits and pieces of the pages that are used for grounding get attributed to the final text output, and that's what we refer to as citations. So citations reflect the grounding context, and grounding context is a representation of the page in Google's back processing pipeline for the grounding of AI models. Sounds a bit of a word salad, but I'll explain concepts a bit further. So this is the generative segment, like one chunk of text that the model has generated. We've got a little citation that attributes a statement that we took from this website to ground and support the statement made by the model. So that's a citation supported by the grounding context of that one grounding source. And so we can see like a little grounding content segment there, which is just a chunk of text that's taken by the model to support that page. Now, can you see how I've highlighted little bits and pieces of text in different ways? That's to signify that these are tokens, and they have different, well, like humans, I'm seeing Dalton Catering and Rockley Markets as a highlight, but the model sees tokens, and tokens are actually just really numbers, token IDs. All that, each token is converted to a vector. Vector goes through a transformer network, and it has its little attention patterns and things, right? So you could have higher attention, lower attention. That's how these models work. So what this means, like if you have a brand like this, and the model is starting to say things about that brand, right? If you say company, that specializes to this is the completion of the model. If you say German, it'll say this. It'll say custom, it'll say that. So every time you change one aspect of the text, the model wants to say another thing. So that means that at every junction in the model's completion, if you swap the word around, you get a completely different sentence completed. And again, and again, and again. And so there's a whole universe of possibilities what a model could say about a brand. And so that works the other way around. If you have a piece of text on your website, and that's used as a grounding source for the model, what you put in the text really does influence what model will do with that text, whether it'll be favorable or not. So that's the good news. On-page optimization, old school SEO work can have an impact on models' attitudes and preferences towards or against your brand. So that's already like awesome stuff. We can do things that we're comfortable and familiar with. So my way of thinking is, okay, so first thing that I like to do is map the associations that the model has between my brand and the things that the brand does. Measure the strength of those associations. So if my client is Ohio and they do custom sports jerseys, and we've mapped out custom cycling jerseys. Then the next step is to measure how strong is that connection. We know that it associates that brand with all these things that the brand does, but how strong is the connection? So that's the second thing that I do. And then the third thing is to do is, of course, map the citations, which is like the end outcome in terms of that three-step process. Citation is when you're actually being brought up in the results, right? So a slight distinction there. Citations is not mentions. You could be the citation, but not mentioned in the model's output. So those are two different things that we track separately and combine in the final score. And then for when we notice that the citations are maybe a bit skinny, we try to build up both the associations and citations to boost that strength. And where things are completely disconnected, meaning the model doesn't connect the brand, doesn't associate the brand to the things that the brand does, we then need to build those bridges and make sure that the model builds that connection. So first thing is I define the target brands, all the entities I want to track. Then I do the bidirectional probing. So I do brand to all the entities that we associate. Then I go entity, what are the brands that you associate with that entity? That's how I get competitors. And then I do all the entity extraction, categorization of the brands. We're measuring things consistently and measuring the rankings. Now, there's a huge amount of drama online. Somebody called me out for using the word rankings. And this is not your traditional SERP rankings, right? LLMs are rankers. They choose, let's go back to that Dalton catering thing that I showed earlier. So you've got the model response and it'll be mentioning, so Dalton catering, rank 1. Garnish's catering, rank 2. There's an ordinal value to the brand mentions in text. That's how text works. Something has to be, we read left to right. Something has to be mentioned first, something has to be mentioned second, and so on and so on. So when I say rankings, there's a distinction when an LLM, like Gemini, ranks things, and the traditional rankings in Google search, which is not what I'm talking about here. So just to protect myself against, that's not rankings. Of course, it's not rankings, but it is in a sense. So your brand has the entities that model associate with, and this is some of the entities that the models associate with me. And every time I ask the model, it'll give me a little bit different answer. That's how models work. They're stochastic, right? So one day I'll be asking, what do I do? And then it tells me that. And then another day I ask, and it'll be some concept will get higher up the list of things. I ask, name top 10 things that my brand does, and it'll be mentioning the things. So that's how I measure I guess the ordinal value and frequency, right? So some things will go down day by day, and some things will just disappear. Some things will pop into existence, some things will disappear and then come back in. Yeah. So then we've got frequency, and we've got the ordinal value ranking measurements. And so you collect a vast amount of data of this, and then you can come up with scoring. So let's look at IKEA. So you've got the things that IKEA does. List 10 things that are associated with a brand called IKEA in Australia. And then you get list 10 brands in Australia that you associate with two-seater sofas. And that's how you get the competitors for IKEA. Brand to entities, entities brand.
So we do have a question on entities, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So Nick's popped through entities. Is this from NER or are these seed queries from Google Search Console?
Neither. These are associative entities that models come to mind when you mention the brand. So we go, IKEA, top 10 things. What comes to mind? Associative. It's kind of like surveying models. And then they say, this is for real. Flat pack furniture, meatballs. Number 2, showroom, Swedish design, home decor, self-assembly. So these are the concepts that come up when you prompt the model. What are the main associations when you think IKEA? What comes to mind? And this is what we do in a structured way. So the model just surrenders the concepts to us. And of course, we probe that on an ongoing basis. I can see Nick is having a follow-up. So the highest association tokens to the brand. Exactly. And we can measure that on a bit more granular level using log probes. But that's a bit advanced topics. We'll leave that maybe for like a discussion later on. So yeah, we're dealing with stochastic sampling. Models are random. And you can't really probe model once and say, oh, I rank number 2. Because you hit it 5 times and the rankings will be varied. So you have to account for that. What we do is when we measure things, we ask model 5 times and we come up with a mean. Models then fine-tuned, so you can get different results when they fine-tune. New model releases and grounding. Grounding is a strong bias. And then we do also pre-processing to clean up that data. And we come up with a whole, obviously more than 10, but many times, and every now and then you get a new concept, your list will continue to grow. So think about it as surveying the models. And you can do beautiful work with math in terms of your own formulas and scoring, how you want to calculate your own visibility. For example, using normalized frequency times inverted average rank to give you an idea how well you're doing. So we've got an entity that is associated with the brand, and we've got the competitor as well because we've done the other direction. And for every entity, we get a different set of brands that compete for that term in AI visibility, right? So that's our association mapping. Relevance mapping is very straightforward, actually. If user was looking for AI SEO and one of the grounding sources was DEJAN, would you recommend it? Yes, no. So you ask the model, it says yes. But then you ask it again, it says no. So what you do is you ask it multiple times and you get the yeses and nos and you come up with a score. How many times did it recommend DEJAN out of 79 times asked? But you could do this grounded and ungrounded. This is the nuance. You could just ask the model and build the confidence of the model natively in this parametric memory. Or you could plug in the grounding to see how much does the search grounding influence the model's answers as the secondary bias of the model. So we've got two modalities. One is ungrounded and one is grounded. Grounded is when the search is plugged into the model and model can peek at that cheat sheet of the search results. So we've got primary bias and grounding bias. So we've gone through associations, relevance, mapping, and then we've got the citations. So that's the entity. Those are the queries associated with that entities. And these are the synthetic queries and fanouts that model might use to look up those entities. And then we've got the organic search queries as well, and all of them map to prompts. So you have an entity, you've got the queries, both organic and fanouts effectively link to the prompts. So back to this. So we've got the text input, the search results, the prompt, text output, everything maps, and the source URLs are mapped to that. So see what I did there? It's like a tiny little 2 slides difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. Your full page doesn't get into the model's grounding context with Google. They pick bits and pieces of your page content and supply that to Gemini to represent your page, not your full page. And it's different every time depending on the shape of the query fanouts. So query fanouts plus your page content will determine which bits of your content will get into the Gemini's grounding context. That's where it gets a little bit complicated. So the data shape, we've got the brand, entity, query, organic, paid, synthetic, fanout, prompt. Prompt goes to fanout actually. And then we've got the SERPs. So we got the search results, and then we've got our own URLs, third-party URLs, which pertain to a certain brand. We've got the full text of the model, chunks generated by the model, the snippets that support those chunks. We've got the model itself, the output of the model, and we've got the URLs, metrics, mentions, citations, brand, owned, third-party, frequency, position, sentiment, associate. What the hell is going on? Don't worry, it's just a network of concepts. It all maps together. It's important to keep them linked. Entity maps to search query maps to prompt, and keep it all together.
So just for anyone who's not familiar, if you go back to the previous slide. Oh, well, yep, nodes and edges. Do you want to just kind of unpack that a little bit and what's going on here?
Well, yeah, so like let's say web pages are nodes and links are edges. There you go. Pages, a link graph of the web is a graph. So pages link to each other through links, and they are nodes. So in a knowledge network or any type of graph, you've got concepts like brands, entities, queries, prompts. They can all be linked conceptually. So for example, you could have an entity that says sports jerseys. Brand is a while. Prompt is, I'm looking for a custom sport jersey for my team, for cycling, for delivery within 3 months. And then that unpacks to fan-out queries. And each fan-out query is its own thing. And each fan-out query brings its own search results. And each search result brings context to the model. The model's pre-processing pipeline generates the grounding snippet, those little bits and pieces of the text. So all those chunks and all those entities and all those prompts are mapped together. They just keep the relationships together. So when you're doing your optimization visibility cycle, you're not looking things disjoint. You need to look at it holistically. You can't like look at them as separate islands. So just unified flow. And so when you're doing work like, so back in the day, we used to do click-through rate optimization. Now we're doing selection rate optimization. Will the model select me from the pool of available grounding sources to use me as the grounding source? And when it does, will it include me as the mention? So that's the new work that we're doing on top of the click-through rate optimization. We're doing selection rate optimization through understanding model psychology. So human psychology, we can't open people's skulls and poke around with electrodes.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, anyway. So we rely. I mean, you could put an electroencephalogram and clumsily and noisily test things. But when you go to a psychologist, they typically ask you questions, and so there's input, and then there's something going in your head, and there's an output, right? And then you give your answers. So models are not very different. You've got the input, something happens, all the attention stuff in the transformer network, and the output comes, and that's what we can reliably observe. So in the model psychology, we actually do have the ability to open up the hood and probe the models, but only if they're open weights, like Gemma and Llama and Mistral and so on. If the model is closed source, you can't do that. You only have to rely on inputs and outputs. And that's what we were doing before. Remember all that fast talking, complicated stuff Dan just did? That's me asking model things, writing them down, and making sense of it. Because there's no way you can get into the model's head because this is closed source, right? We don't know their parameters, we don't know how they train, and this and this and that. But we can ask them questions, we can measure the outputs, and we can work towards models' attention optimization. So what I did, I analyzed a lot of models' outputs, and I really do mean a lot, like hundreds of millions of model probes. And we sort of have an understanding what's the grounding budget, how they sort things, what is the amount of characters and words that got into grounding sources, and so on and so on. So if you have a very long page, less of that page will get into the grounding context because they seem to have like a fixed amount that they're willing to ground the page with. But what's interesting is that we actually got through to the back end and we saw the grounding snippets. And we can confidently say that some parts of the page will not be selected as the grounding context, and some parts of the page will be selected as being used in the grounding snippets. So traditional search, you've got the query, ranked URLs, user clicks, and then user reads the page. But in AI search, we've got the prompts, fanouts, ranked URLs, selected URLs, snippet construction. AI synthesizes the answer, and then user clicks on the citations or linked mentions. A little tool they can use to help you understand how your page might convert into a grounding context. You can enter a prompt and then get the idea of which parts of that page will be used to ground which part of the page. So that's a little freebie that we put out to help people understand how grounding methodology works. And actually pretty close. So when I measure the output from the tool and the Google's choices, they're actually very similar. So that's the generated snippet. And how it works in the backend is you input the query and the passage, and it gets through a joint attention in the model's network, and then you come up with a relevant score. So the model basically chunks your entire content and scores each passage in that content as to how relevant it is to the fan-out query. And that's what forms the grounding context. All right, so LLM's reliable rankers. This was an interesting study that I replicated, and it worked. This was a study. Can you manipulate the model to always rank you number one when you ask it to recommend some brands? And this was really about brand recommendation, and it worked phenomenally well. It just worked with some. I was inserting random rubbish and symbols and random words in the text that somehow steered the model in the direction of favoring your brand. And it worked phenomenally well. The problem with the study was that they used made-up names for brands. When I tried to apply this for real work with real clients and real brands, it didn't work because the effect was very subtle. When you add IKEA there and when you put Nike and real brands, the brand perception outweighs this subtle effect that this has. But what we ended up with is the process that we used as a testing framework. We basically put everything in a measurement framework, and we say, can we increase the model selection rate towards the target snippet or target page in comparison to what it was before? So this is what it looks like. So at position 0, we take a page and we say, rank in the order of preference for this page, for that input query, which one's the best, which one's the worst. And so as a step 1, we have, as a step 0, we have the original rankings. So this is where this brand started as a preference number 10. And then we do algorithmic content optimization, where at every step of the optimization process, we try to change one little thing on the page. And we measure the model's preferences. And we measure it for not just one model, but we measure it for different models as well. So we're not optimizing for one model and de-optimizing for the other. And
Have
so,
you, oh,
yep.
sorry, have you seen where the relevance score is low, that the grounding snippet isn't immediately recognizable or recognizably related to the query with the most CTR for that page?
Yes, so that's why we introduced two, and it's a problem that I'm still working on. There are two modes of optimization. One, you generate the grounding snippets first, and you show the grounding snippets to the models for every competing result, and then you tweak the grounding snippet. What you see on the screenshot is that mode. That's maybe a little bit, I'm not going to call it dishonest, but assuming that the grounding snippet will be like that when the Google processes it. We're working on approximation only at this stage, but it seems to be very, very close to what Google does in the background. We can do the back end as well, but it's too slow. The second mode of optimization is actually showing the full page. I think that's a bit more honest, but it's not as closely aligned as what models will really see. But it's more of an SEO task. So you're showing the different versions of the page, and you're asking the models to rank. And so we can see the optimization journey at every step, and we can see the impact of text. So this is what I was talking about. You change the text a little bit, and then suddenly the model likes it better than they did before. And we're not making this up. The models are really telling us what they prefer. And then as a result, because you've done structured text modifications, you can actually see what the model suggested. It said original line men's soccer jerseys replaced with men's custom football jerseys. And so it kept making these little tweaks, and then at the end of the day, I get the content brief that tells me what to do. Now, the content brief is for a human to judge whether to do this or not. We're not just going to optimize for LLMs alone, right? We have to optimize for search as well, traditional search. So the tweak that you're making here should not undo your SEO work. And the things that you do here should not de-optimize for conversion rate optimization, or decrease the user experience. So those are the overarching principles that you cannot. So I can't do this automatically. This is a guide for me to work from. And finally, we get, because sometimes when we do this optimization process, sometimes we decrease. This is a regression here. So what model is this? Claude liked it less when we did this, whatever the optimization step was there. So essentially, we get the list of positive rank factors and the negative rank factors. Basically, we say, well, we have an idea, snippets that open with a direct proposition, value proposition, naming, blah, blah, blah. So that's an idea that we tested and it worked. But we also have the negative stuff. We tested, we thought it was going to increase the ranks, and it didn't. Now, again, disclaimer, I'm not talking about search rankings, I'm talking about model preference rankings, right? And then so at the end, you can process a massive amount of this type of data and get to the bottom line editorial guidelines. Here are the things that models like for this industry and for this client that you could do in your text in general to help the copy of this text be more appealing for model selection and integration in the AI answers.
Sanya actually has a couple of questions on this for you, if that's alright. For years, SEO was mainly about optimizing for Google's search index. Now we are using several chat models, ChatGPT, Claude, etc. First, are these AI tools using Google's index, their own index, or something else as this retrieval layer? And secondly, do brands need to optimize differently for each LLM, or is the approach mostly the same across all platforms?
Love the question. Awesome. So Google, Bing, and Brave. Those are the sources. So Brave became relevant, and I think people, it's really, really flying under the radar. So Brave, they have a browser, and they capture content and index stuff as people browse. So they're not really necessarily working like Google works, but they're supplying an enormous amount of data to Anthropic. OpenAI is a bit shady about how they get their data. I'm guessing Bing is still the partner, but we've seen evidence of scraping. I'm not going to speculate too much around that. But yeah, you have to look at both, no, all three, I suppose. Google's traditional index for Gemini and so on. Then you have to look after Bing visibility, traditional SEO visibility for OpenAI, and then Brave for Anthropic. I don't know if Anthropic is leaning on any other channels as well, but that's what I remember. So Sam also had a. Oh, sorry, there was a second thing. Do brands need to optimize differently for each LLM, or is the approach mostly the same? Okay, so there are some. Gosh, that's a great question as well. So Gemini will do grounding snippets based on extractive summarization. So basically, it'll take a page, score chunks, and smash together a grounding snippet that'll be verbatim bits and pieces of your content. OpenAI uses a sliding window. So, like the model's back processing pipeline can sort of like zoom in on different parts of the page. Whereas Anthropic's models, they rely on something very similar to Google's grounding context. Google's grounding context is very hidden. They're sort of guarding it and protecting it. Whereas Anthropic, I just probed the model and it just gave it to me. So basically using the same sort of extractive summarization, little chunks, ellipses, chunk, ellipses, chunks, and that's what gets into the model context. So yeah, there are differences, but they're not about the models. They're about the software that surrounds the models.
We also had Sam. He has shared a little comment with us. There was a news recently circulating that Brave is now being used by Claude. I guess the same thing applied as these models now need information, and Claude Gemini would choose anyone. The fundamentals are the same.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like if you do good SEO principles, because SEO is the 90% of your AI visibility. If you're not in the grounding context of the model, you're not even in the mix for selection, right? So there's nothing to select from. So all those principles are there. So basically, visibility in those models. Now, I personally haven't looked too much into Brave and try to manipulate their factors simply because they weren't relevant until now. So this is like a new thing for us, new thing to study. Brave, how does it work? How do you get up? Because Anthropic suddenly became relevant, I think, since the biggest marketing campaign that Anthropic had was when they were banned as a supply chain risk in the US, when the Trump administration banned them. And then they become the household name. Prior to that, they were pretty unknown by majority. So I think Anthropic is relevant now. I hear a lot of people talking about Perplexity. I see sort of Perplexity on its way out. GPT also, like OpenAI, I don't think they have a good business model. So I'm actually, in my head, I'm thinking Anthropic is really important, maybe for different things, but Google definitely owns AI search and they will dominate no matter what. So that's sort of like where I put my priorities. There's another question.
One more, yeah. Just want to make sure that citations is not equal to AI score, but what determines the AI score is the original rank and frequency.
The ordinal rank and frequency.
Ordinal, sorry, yes.
Yes, yes. So yeah, I mean AI score. I would be careful around using just arbitrary AI visibility scores by all these tools and SaaS that you subscribe to, and because you don't know how the formula works, I think you're better off just creating your own formula that you know how good or bad it is and what its weaknesses and strengths are. So, for example, what I do is I measure the frequency of mentions. So I probe the models and I measure how, out of 100 probes, how many times was my brand mentioned for that entity. So that's that mapping, right? So that's one score. So the other score is when my brand was mentioned, what was its position in the text? Was it the first brand mentioned? Was it the second, third, and so on? So that's my ordinal value. That's my rank. But of course, I do average rank. So those are the mentions. But there's also the citations where you are as a grounding source. So you could measure the position of you as the grounding source in the model's grounding metadata. That's a bit more technical, but I'm not sure how different it is from traditional SEO. Basically, if you're result number 3 in Google, you'll be a result number 3 in the grounding context metadata when the API comes back with a response for that fan-out query. So that's your traditional SEO measurement. So you could arguably say, well, I'm not going to measure my traditional ranks as citations. I will only be measuring the mentions in the model's output, the frequency and the position. So those are two solid metrics to use to measure.
I think
Okay,
we're done.
good questions, guys. I love that.
Oh, wait, no, they came back. We have a follow up. Is there any platforms out there that measure these scores? I have heard tools like Evertune.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you because I don't trust other people's tools, so I just built my own. And so like the one that you're seeing on the screen is the one that I put together that does all the measurements, and I know its strengths and weaknesses and how it works. Now, fun fact. One time I shared a screenshot on LinkedIn of how like I was like discussing something about I think it was about this process here, and I didn't crop the image, and there was a URL in there of my tool. And I currently have 113 users of the tool. I didn't publish or tell anyone that it exists. So I'm being careful about how I publicize the tech stack we have. But if somebody's like super keen to get on board and like explore this, measure their visibility, optimize their content, reach out. I'm trying not to create an avalanche of users on the tool because we're using it for client work and internally. It is accessible to the users in public, and some people are using it, but it's not what I'm trying to do. So if somebody's super keen and wants to have a play, let me know, and I'll show you around. There's no problems with that. I can only vouch for things that I've built. I can't really support somebody else's math when they calculate the scores and things.
Yeah, I did share a link to DEJAN tools so people can go have a look at those. Zanya has asked if you were to create a dashboard with 3 to 5 metrics for, I guess, measuring the AI SEO factor, what would they be?
If I was to create a dashboard, it would look like this.
If I were to create a dashboard, which I did.
So okay, so we've got a couple of things. So we're measuring. It doesn't always go up, by the way. If you don't do any work, it actually for our own brand it goes down at the moment. We're not doing any work like self promotion. We're not publishing listicles, and we're gonna do some
Agency
self
left.
promotion ASAP. It's really embarrassing. But basically, what we're looking at the citation share. And we're looking at mention share, and then we're sort of blending the two scores of share of voice. And you can see how the two have inverted. That they've sort of traded places at this point, meaning that citation share to me is your SEO work, and mention share is the model in like how far you've influenced the model with your content. So I guess so. This one here shows you the actual daily mentions and citations. So these are the regular probes, consistent probes on the same set of entities that we're tracking, and we can see progress in how that's being measured. So we split it up by Google and OpenAI. We can track competitors. These are brand associations, counts, things that we're not so confident with, things that need a little bit of work. So if something drops, for example, so these are the mention strong and cite weak. So these need a little bit of work. The models are mentioning us, but we're not in the citations. And so for every individual entity, we can zoom in on that entity and see if we're making progress on that one specific entity. Yeah. So hopefully that clarifies, what I would be tracking. I mean, there's other things that we measure. This is like a top level dashboard. So in the tracking, we also have like the granular, the deltas daily. But I wouldn't pay too much attention to daily because models are random and stochastic. Look at things monthly or weekly, not daily, because it may not mean anything. That's one if we're being honest about these types of things. So splitting mentions and citations, but we also get the context, right? It's not really a metric, but the context does tell you, like if you're asking, give me 10 brand recommendations, you can zoom in on that and see what brands are mentioned. Oh yes, the client is number one. So good that I clicked on that one. So you get the brand, but you also get the tail that says something about that brand. So here's a cool thing that you could do. You could basically, if you do structured probing like that, you can do brand perception analysis by feeding all the context from all the probes that you've done as brand perception and understand what different models associate with the brand, how is it positioned, and what are the recurring things that the models associate with that. You can split it up by OpenAI and Google or Anthropic if you like, and basically understand on a holistic level how well the models understand the brand. And of course, you could do ad hoc citation mining. One thing I didn't want to promote is prompt tracking. I think that's busy work and that doesn't really do much. So I leave prompt analysis, citation analysis as one-off qualitative probes to help us understand the brand strengths, the prospecting opportunities, types of pages being cited, and so on. So that's another metric, but we don't pretend like it means something for ongoing visibility tracking because prompts are too messy, too random. You can't personalize things.
Too ephemeral.
Yeah, yeah. I see people do things like they generate prompts and they're like, I'm a 25-year-old female from Sydney looking for like, come on, that's not personalization. That's fudging it. Be honest, models are random. You can't predict what people will type in. In fact, I think I have Somewhere I have in the pile of my slides, I have something. I have a statement about that. Maybe I can find it. There you go. There's no prompt search volume. Rank tracking of a fixed set of arbitrary prompts is meaningless. Scraping AI assistant layout is useless in the age of dynamic UI. There's nothing to be gained because it's shifting all the time. Spying on people's real chat sessions is creepy. Don't do it. Like the clickstream data. AI doesn't give you the edge. It's now considered basic digital literacy. So you can say, "Oh, we use AI. Everyone uses AI." So that's not the edge for you. Not everything that could be done with AI should be done with AI, guys. Come on. You don't take all your data, feed it into an LLM and say, give me the report. It'll make mistakes. It'll hallucinate. I don't trust anything complex with models. I like to maybe get AI to run a script for me, build a script that calculates things the way I can interpret mechanistically. And tasks which need AI often don't need a gigantic model. That's another thing. You don't need like a bulldozer to replant some daisies in your backyard. And there is no AI does this. Each platform does its things different ways. Anthropic, they have their own little pre-processing pipeline. Google has its own. OpenAI has its own. And you have to understand that these things are fuzzy probabilistic. And you have to play with that paradigm. Like instead of probing things once, probe it 5 times or 100 times to get the probability. And be honest, we don't know what we don't know, and we're still experimenting and trying to do things in meaningful ways. Sharing. So if somebody shares something, has an idea, don't put them down. Point out your own experiments and collaborate as a community, and we'll all be better for it doing it that way. Are there more
100%.
questions? We have
We have
questions.
so many more questions. We're
Yeah.
just full on in Q&A mode at this point. So I think you've answered quite a bit of this one. So Sam sent us a few questions. So do we then run our own tests, make changes, and then also create custom tracking with those prompts? I think we've sort of addressed the prompt tracking part of it. And any recommendations for tools? I think your recommendation is make your own tool, basically. And separate from how we track overall, as everyone is tied to the number of prompts we can track, I think we need more custom tools with our own APIs. Is that
Yeah.
what you recommend?
Let me show you my way of thinking. So this dashboard that you've seen and this visibility tracking, this will look very different if I put different tracking entities in there. But since I don't use prompts, I go, so my bread and butter, my baseline is what I was talking about at the very start, those entities, right? So we have certain entities like, say, 3D kit designer, custom basketball jerseys, custom basketball uniforms. Each one is mapped to its canonical URL, and each one is mapped to a category and any tags that we have. So when I design my entities and I map them cleanly to these URLs, I'm then in a position to say, okay, my visibility tracking, in my tracking settings, I'm going to enable these entities and I'm going to be tracking these. So what happens is when I probe these, I'm not pretending to be using all those long prompts. What I'm doing instead is, let's see, for example, for this one, user is looking for custom darts shirts. Recommend 10 brands. It's a very structured prompt and it's always the same. And there's no story there. You know, we're not doing citation mining, we're doing structured visibility probing. We're always measuring the top 10 recommendations and the tail of those recommendations and what comes up. Actually, I just realized there's not 10 samples here because I was biasing the model. Now I'm asking just recommend some brands. And it's giving me a free amount. You can say 3, you can say 12, whatever. So that was one mistake I made earlier. I regret doing that. I regret fixing it into 10 because 10 sounded like a really nice mathematical way to keep everything structured. But it was putting the model into too much of it was starting to make things up. It didn't have the 10 brands, it made the rest of them, and it started loading up. So basically, this is what I do: is I have a very structured prompt, and I don't do long form prompting for visibility tracking. Of course, when we're analyzing the citations, we actually do have very long prompts. So these are some of the responses. You can actually see some of these. Let me see in the settings. Where are the prompts? Okay, we've got 1,010 prompts. So we're not like ignoring the value of analysis of prompts. We're just not using it for visibility tracking. So there's one, right?
And are these from your own database or?
So prompt generation can be done based on manual entry or bulk entry. So we can just enter them. We can do query-based prompts. Remember that graph of nodes and edges? So we can basically generate the prompt based on our organic query or the fan-out query, and then that prompt links to that entity or that query. So we have the prompt query relationship there. That's quite useful, and then we can also have entity-based prompts, whereas we can say, okay, custom darts shirts is our entity, and I can say generate some prompts for that, and it'll give me prompts, but these prompts are related to that entity. Or I can just go from a URL, give it a page, say give me 100 prompts based on what you think people might type in to find that URL in search results. Hit that, and that's that URL linked prompt generation. So prompt generation is quite diverse. You can steer the model in the prompt generation. You can say, give me bottom of funnel, top of the funnel, somebody is still researching, somebody ready to buy, any type of customization steering for research purposes and for analysis of these prompts, but again, not for visibility tracking. Hope that makes sense.
And Naomi has asked, how do you obtain and validate citation data from your sources, given that AI generated information can vary significantly in accuracy and consistency?
So citation data we collect both in the tracking probes and the citations, but we split it up by the domains. We extract the brands and we analyze the pages as well. For OpenAI, there's also unselected domains it's considered but hasn't used in the citations, and we also have the fan out queries for each platform. So that's the first level of insight, and then we've got domains, pages, and then we've got the brand mentions, fan outs, and then actual responses. The responses actually contain the content of the model's response, which tell us the long story of what it said. But there's also the metadata that tells us for each segment of the model's response which page was used to ground and support that claim. So that data is already linked. That Google's and OpenAI's and Anthropic's APIs actually give you that for free. It's part of the API's output. Now this is API. You're not looking at the live result of AI mode. To get that, you need to scrape, but then you don't get the metadata. So this is the best approximation available to you to do any sort of meaningful structured work.
So Nick has a follow-up on this. Looking at the citation results, how much is the agentic layer multimodal? Referencing YouTube, infographic, have you seen an increase or has this not yet started to trend for queries that traditional SERPs show rich carousels?
Yeah, we're seeing YouTube and Reddit and other things quite dominant. But interestingly, we're seeing decline of Wikipedia. Like Wikipedia is coming up more and more in unselected sources. Let me see if I can find. So they go Reddit, massive. So Reddit is like preferred by Google, but we're actually seeing it suggested a lot, but then declined a lot as well.
Do you think that might be purposeful? I read an article from them recently that they are rejecting any AI generated like input to the website. So if like they think any suspect any contributor has used AI generated text, they remove it.
Actually, I don't think models are quite sophisticated to be able to do that. They're quite gullible and naive at the moment, to the point where if you could easily influence the model's opinions on things. You can just say that's why listicles work. We are the best. I have a post that says I am the best, and the model just says yeah. So I heard the word agentic earlier. Was that from Nick or
Yeah.
yes?
So how much is
So
the agentic layer multimodal?
yeah, so we've got the situation where our AI assistants are not only, it's not just you chatting to the model like you used to. Now they have a harness surrounding the model with all sorts of tools and things, and you can code and build custom layouts for you and so on and so on. So what happens is some of the manifestations of these models, let's call it that way, their harness is comprised of, that's like one of my first slides, wasn't it? Let's go back to it. This, yeah. So you've got sub-agents, for example. And so the giant model like this, like let's say this is the opus level model. This one has its minions, which is like little sonnets or haiku level models. And these minions go and fetch stuff for the model and they make mistakes, right? But here's the nuance. When a little sub agent makes the mistake, brings it to the big model is so gullible It treats anything that the subagent brings to it as facts. So if the subagent makes a mistake about your brand, about your product, about what you do through either like a wrong fan out query that you used or through a wrong snippet being generated. So this is like snippet from your page could be generated in such a way that presents your brand in a less favorable way. So any number of ways that this could go wrong, but once the subagent delivers the findings, the results, the context to the primary model, the final judge, the one that ranks things in the output, that this model will take it as absolute truth. So you're now at the mercy of whatever the subagents did, and the big model will just say, "Yep, that's a fact." Well, most recent example, it was conflating Mike King from iPull Rank. He coined the term relevance engineering, which I actually like. And I was just probing the model about something around that, and it said how I had a contribution in that. I was like, what?
I saw that on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And so I was like, no, I didn't. Had nothing to do with it. This is Mike's work. And he said, oh, yeah, okay. My sub agent brought that information to me. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. You know, I had to apologize. And so this is the real problem currently, that the information veracity is not there. You need to also do checks to see when you're prompting the models, are they saying wrong things? Are the outputs of the models misaligned with against how you want your brand to be perceived as? So that's next level of problems we have to deal with now.
All right, I'll try and get through these last questions real quick because we're running out of time. So Jason has shared what would be the single most impactful thing that a website can implement to improve AI visibility. 1. Content rewrite optimization. 2. Increase external mention citations. Or 3. Increase content publishing volume to target query fanouts.
0. Improve your SEO. Like doesn't even come close. Seriously, just work on your SEO. If you're not in the context for the model, you're not going to be there. But okay, that's I feel like I'm cheating. I'm not really answering the question. Let's assume you're doing well in SEO and you are in the grounding context of the model. What then? What I think that's the question. Of course, Jason isn't a noob. He's like one of the OGs.
He's amazing. He's been at
Yeah,
Edge of
yeah, yeah.
Search for the last 2 years. He won't be with us this year. I'm very sad about it. But yeah, he is
So
incredible.
So to be fair with the question, whether it's between, so if we have the choices, content rewrite optimization, increase external mention citations, increase content publishing volume to, I'm actually at the moment, I'm really strongly biased towards content optimization because I'm seeing some really good results through my, you've seen some graphs there. I do, it's actually Bayesian inference based. So we're constantly updating our system of beliefs based on the new evidence that comes through new probes. So I'm seeing the content optimizer do really well. I'm seeing some really encouraging early results in terms of selection rate, but the content rewriting and optimization is not the, you won't win unless you increase the citations, right? So mention slash citation, I would separate those two into 2 points. Citations, increase those, yes. The mentions will be increased if you optimize the content. So we're kind of blending the point one and two. Increase content publishing volume to target query fanouts. Not so much. Not so much. I would I would prefer blended one and two in the way that I just described it. Really fantastic question. I love it.
Yes, Jason said, oh, well said. Okay, we've got 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. So, as a follow up to what we're talking about here with this slide that you can see here, the sub agents, Zenya has asked what type of sub agents?
So basically, you could look at it as analogy that I made earlier. Like if you have a heavyweight model like Opus 4.8 or like Fable, they're expensive models to run, and you don't get those models to do your minion tasks. You get a cheap model to do the searches, to do the background work and research. So typically, you would have model like Haiku, or if it's a bit more complex task like Sonnet, do the work for the big model like Opus and bring the results and findings to it. And so that's an example of a sub-agent that works on a background task, brings the findings to the main model, and then main model presents it. So that all that is part of the agentic harness or the system that supports the model.
And last question we've got for someone starting out in SEO today, what would your top advice be?
Top advice is to try things and try things and try things and try things. Start up your own little website, poke around, probe, experiment heavily, aggressively, do things, make mistakes, get penalized, try again. Don't trust what people are saying or writing. Just do it yourself. Experiment, and with your own evidence, build your own picture of what is possible. Obviously, you've got all the knowledge now in your friendly chat LLM. You can ask these basic questions. Just be mindful of one thing, is that large language models have learned from us. So all the mistakes and all the BS that we put out there as an SEO community, all the lies and smoke and mirrors, that's all gone into training, and it's parroted back to us, creating a loop. So be critical of the recommendations. It's a good scaffolding, good guide, and I use LLMs to guide my own learning, things that I'm uncomfortable and unfamiliar with. But I would not trust it as being an expert, because it's literally giving you the most average thing it can. That's what they do. They average everything and then they give you the information. So I would take a solid LLM as my guide, and then I would test everything, trust but verify kind of principle. That's probably the best way to do things these days.
I mean, I think that's always been the classic SEO advice is build your own website, build your own assets, learn how to do stuff, test and test and test, and we've built an entire industry on just testing. So I think
that's the mentality.
Change, you know? All right, I think that is all the questions. Thank you so much to everybody. This has been one of the most engaged webinars we've had, so this has been extremely cool for me. Thank you, Dan, so much for your time as well, and to all of you who've joined us. Please go and connect with Dan on LinkedIn. He shares all the cool stuff. Well, he shares some of the cool stuff that he's doing on there, and we need to get him to share more. You need to promote. We need to get that ball rolling. And if you enjoyed today's presentation, one of Dan's colleagues, she's also in the chat, Nick Ranger, she is going to be at Edge of Search this year, which we're very excited about. So you can check out Nick and our other speakers at edgeofsearch.com. This year's conference is happening 3rd and 4th of September, where we'll be bringing you more original and innovative content. Just like this and Zenya, the next webinar will be happening next month. I haven't set a date yet, but I will let you all know. You are on my little list, so I can contact you all about it. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you all.